The year has gone by. We've been focused on our work. We've been being parents. If you're an entrepreneur, running businesses, we've been navigating family. And as we come to the end of the season, these are the times where we tend to feel most exhausted. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to another episode. It's Dr. Maisha, and as always, I'm grateful to be with you. We are almost at the end of the year, and we're in the midst of a holiday season. And as such, I thought it appropriate for us to talk a little bit about rest and the kinds of rest that we need, but not just the kinds of rest that we need. How do we structure that for ourselves? How do we structure the kinds of rest that we need for ourselves? Now, I have been thinking about this topic for months now. And as we come to the end of the season, these are the times where we tend to feel most exhausted. The year has gone by. We've been focused on our work. We've been being parents. If you're an entrepreneur, running businesses, we've been navigating family. And for some, this type of year comes not only with the complication of family dynamics and maybe even caretaking, but also with the complexities of grief, whether it be grief of loss of a loved one, grief of relationships that we imagine would be that are not, life transitions. There are all types of grief that can come up and that require our rest to move through. And so my inspiration for this episode is absolutely Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, who is the author of Sacred Rest. And she talks about the different kinds of rest that we need. Now, I'm going to name them, but I'm not going to talk about them because that's for you to discover when you read her book. And she talks about these types of rest. And a lot of times when we think about rest, we think about it maybe from a few dimensions. We think about it from maybe the physical dimension, maybe the mental dimension. But we don't always think about, unless you're an introvert, social rest, right? Social rest is important. And the other types of rest involved are sensory rest. There's so many things that stimulate us in the world, not to mention the scrolling that we do on our phones, the social media, this constant stimulation of technology, of AI. And then there is the physical world of stimulation, the things that we hear in the news, just the world around us is stimulating. So our senses are always taking in some type of sensory input, based on what we see, what we hear, what we're sensing and feeling, what our emotions. And so sensory rest is also an imperative that we must consider. And then there's emotional rest. And it may seem obvious when we say it, right? Like, of course, emotional rest. But again, when we're navigating various places, whether you're going to work and you're having to code switch a bit, or whether you are constantly regulating your emotions for the various circumstances you're in. If you're a parent, you're constantly modeling emotional regulation for your kids. Then you go to work and you have to regulate yourself in the office. Then you come home and there's always this constant emotional regulation. And sometimes that leads to emotional suppression and repression. And so that emotional rest is really that space of naming and allowing the emotion to be so that it can pass through us. And then there's the social rest that I talked about earlier, getting that quiet time. I'm going to talk about that. And creative rest, maybe when you're creating and you're molding, like as for me, when I was creating my course, when I was creating my Communication That Transforms course, and I was deep into it with creating the visuals and the PowerPoint, creating the videos, thinking about the topics and how they go together and how I want to create each topic. And that takes a lot of brain work. And so there were times where I had to step away from that to allow myself to just have that creative rest. In fact, you all may know by now that I'm going to be stepping back on the TEDx Asheville stage. And this past week, I was working on the talk and I was getting a lot of downloads, but I wasn't really in the space to actually start writing. I needed to just sit back and sort of chew on some of the ideas and allow them to percolate. And so creative rest is just allowing ourselves to step away from creating for a moment because that takes up brain energy as well. And then there's something called spiritual rest, and that's that creating that deep connection. So these are the different types of rest. And so what I want to talk about is creating the structures to get your rest. What are creating the structures to get your rest? Because it's one thing to know that there are these different types of rest and to know the type of rest that you might need. But there's something entirely different to create the structure for it, to create a plan for it. So as we go into this second half of the holiday season, what I invite you to do is to create your plan for these different types of rest. And in addition to that, looking into the next year, looking into 2026, what does it look like to create a structure where you are constantly checking in and also creating space for these different types of rest? So I can tell you for myself, the physical rest is important, but even so, what I recognize for myself that is extremely important is that social rest, the mental rest, the creative rest, because I'm always creating. And I think that creative and mental rest are close cousins with one another, right? Because that, depending on what you're creating, now if you're creating with your hands, it might be that the creative rest and the physical rest are actually more closely related. But for me, I create a lot of intellectual property and conversations and consumables. And so when I'm creating, I'm using a lot more of that mental energy than the physical energy. And so for me, when I am thinking about what are the types of rest that I most need, of course, I need to sleep 7 hours a night, but I also need to have at least an hour of quiet time a day. Now, that might seem easy given that I work from home, but it actually is not because even though I'm working, my work primarily occurs from home. I'm always interfacing. I'm always interfacing with clients, with coaching and presenting and facilitating. And so I'm always engaged, even if it is from my own home in front of my desk. And when I'm not engaging, I'm reading articles, I'm reading books. I'm thinking about what is the next, how is it I can best serve my clients that I coach and also those that I work with in organizations that I facilitate with. And so my brain is constantly engaged and I'm socially engaged. And so that quiet time is so important to me. And so one of the structures that I have in place is to have quiet lunches and to structure my lunch so that half of the lunch is spent eating and half of the lunch is spent meditating. And so what that looks like, it looks like about 20 minutes of eating and 20 minutes of meditation for about a 40-minute lunch. All right. And so that is something that's a structure that I put in place. Now, how I did that is I actually had to put it in my calendar with reminders coming up because we know that if left to our own devices, we could say, I'm going to do this every day. Just like we say, I'm going to exercise every day. But if we don't have the structure in place to create those rest points, and rest is a very sticky thing because we will put off our rest to get things done. I know for myself, if it's just one more thing that I need to do, it's just going to take 5 more minutes. It's just going to take 10 more minutes. It's just this one last email. It will cut right into that rest time. And if left to my own devices, will push that right off. And it has an impact. And so even with my social, when I'm invited out. I tell you, this past Thanksgiving, I had a much more of a social Thanksgiving than I am typically used to because I don't really celebrate Thanksgiving like that. And so I was invited to my sister's house, and then I was invited to a friend's house for a game night, and then I had a girlfriend come in town. And so all of these things I really wanted to do and had an amazing time doing them. And then what I noticed is that towards the end of the weekend, I realized I hadn't gotten a ton of just really good, quiet downtime. And so what I did was I turned off the television and I curled up on my couch, this one right here that you're looking at, and with a book and just, it was a just read through the book. This is sort of allowing myself to be immersed in another experience and having that quiet time, that downtime. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Sometimes I just lay on the couch and allow myself to just rest, close my eyes, and not without even napping. But I think there has to, once again, has to be a structure in place for that. Otherwise, as I said, if left to our own devices, then we will push off our own needs for the needs of others, for the benefit of our work, for the needs of our family. Now, one of the places that is not often talked about is this space of spiritual rest. And this looks like many different things for many different people. For some, it is that traditional going to a place of fellowship, whether it be a church or whether it be a mosque or whether it be a temple, whether it be whatever type of fellowship that allows you to connect into your spiritual community. That might be your place where you observe your spiritual rest. However, for some people, myself included, that spiritual rest may look a little bit different. If you don't go to a traditional fellowship regularly, say every single Sunday or Saturday for those who observe the Sabbath, then that may look like a daily ritual. So for me, specifically, spiritual rest happens every day. It happens in the mornings when I wake up, when I'm immersed in my gratitude writing. It happens 4 or 5 times a week on the yoga mat when I'm just allowing myself to connect deeply into myself and my body and the space in between. And so that spiritual rest, again, what's the structure? Recognizing what that structure is and allowing for yourself to be flexible in that structure. And so some days it's me observing spiritually alone. And then on some days it is me in community, in my spiritual fellowship community. And that fills me as well. But you do have to have that structure. What is your structure for stepping away? What is your structure when you need creative rest, when you need mental rest? Is it a walk outside? Sometimes that structure has to be physical, right? So when I need a complete mental rest and a creative rest, I go outside in my garden. And in the garden, I can walk around and I can look at my plant. I can put my hands in the dirt, or I can harvest plant my vegetables, or I can even just imagine what's coming next. Okay, what am I going to do with this section of my lawn, of my yard? What plants am I going to to what what vegetables or fruit am I going to plant next? And so for me, that allows me to step away from the intense creative process, mental process, be outside, as we say, and to be able to just walk around and be inside of nature. That also does have a little bit of a spiritual connection for me as well. Some people like to go places and wander. So this is going to sound a little strange, but Walgreens, for those of you all who don't know, Walgreens is a pharmacy like a Rite Aid or a CVS. Sometimes I love to go to the store and just walk around. For me, that's Walgreens. Now, I don't go to necessarily buy anything, but there's something about just meandering around, piddling around, and just looking at products, looking at things that allows my brain to rest, right? That allows my the creative aspect, the mental aspect of me to rest. Sometimes that looks like walking through a park, but a lot of times if it's raining outside, it looks like walking through the store. Sometimes it's walking through Costco, right? And not with, well, I always go to Costco with the intention to buy things, but in terms of Walgreens, not necessarily with the intention to buy anything, but the intention to rest. So, what are those structures for you? And these are things you may already be doing. You may already have a structure. Another structure for me is music. Music. Sometimes when I'm in the car and I've had a very long day, I will either drive in silence or I have specific music that I play. What is that music for you? For me, it may be somebody like Moonchild or someone, it may be someone like Nico and Vince. These are artists that I love that when I play them, they kind of take my brain down a notch. They allow me to be immersed. Sometimes it's Maxwell, sometimes it's Boys to Men. It just, it allows me to be in the music. It depends on the mood that I'm in. So, what is that for you? The point being, coming back to the big picture, I'm sharing with you examples because, again, you may have these structures already set up in your life. Oftentimes we think, oh, we have to create something new to observe these different types of rest. It has to be some complicated structure in order to allow ourselves to rest. But it really doesn't. It really doesn't. If you know the kind of rest you need and you know the thing that helps with that specific kind of rest, then all you need to do is have that thing ready, have the music ready, know when you're going to step away, have the discipline to step away, or create a structured time, dedicated time where that is rest time. And if you do that, if you practice it on a regular basis, then then your body will begin to communicate with you when it's time for that rest. And then you could step away and observe that structure, observe that practice. All right. So when I step away from the yoga mat for too long, my body speaks to me and says, you need to practice, even if you're just doing 15 minutes on the mat. You need to give yourself that rest. Or if I haven't listened to music in a long time and my brain is stressed and it's going, 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 my body will speak to me and say, you know what? It's time to listen to Willow's Rise, or it's time to listen to Moonchild's Ghost Spirit, right? Or it's time to listen to a little Erica Badu, right? So depending on what your body is saying to you, you may have that structure. It's time for you to turn everything. This is me, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm so overstimulated. I'm getting a headache. My body is speaking to me. It's time for you to turn every device off and just lay down for a moment. Just lay down for a moment. And so these are some things that you may have already in your environment. You may have structures already set up for. But what I invite you to do is take that rest. Take that rest. As you move into the holiday season, look at, what do I need? That is the first thing you need to ask yourself. What do I need? What are the types of rest that I know I'm going to need? What are the things that help me with that rest? And what do I already have set up that I'm not pulling in or implementing for this specific type of rest that I need? And what do I need to do to create the space of discipline to practice when I need that rest? You may need an accountability partner. That may be a structure. And if you do need that accountability partner, who is that person? Talk to them today. Invite them to be your accountability partner. Chances are they need it too. So set your structures up. not just for the holiday season, but for the next coming year. And if you're having this conversation with an accountability partner, share this episode because they may need to set their structures up too. And I invite you to share this with a friend, a family member, a colleague that you know may be in the background going through something, or maybe exhausted in the background or close to burnout, and they need this rest. And I invite you to go and check out, if you haven't already, check out Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith's book, Sacred Rest, because it'll take you deeper into what is it that you need and what does it look like. And then you can come back and you can say, you know what? I have these structures already set in place and have a very restful, peaceful days, holiday, and year. So with that, go and plan your rest. I know I am. And if this has been an episode that you have found valuable, I would very much appreciate that you leave a review on the platform on which you're listening, because these types of reviews allow the algorithm to serve this information up more so that we can ripple this transformation out into the community. So I appreciate you leaving a review. I appreciate you sharing this with your community. Have an incredible rest of the year. And until the next time we see each other, stay empowered.